and unsurpassed, and penetrating the perfect dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to the universe and to remember and said, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata teaching. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana is to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. You can either do this directly or through Great Tree, and we will pass it on to them.
Just want to mention that there's a basket now for Genjo, for those of you who are in person. There's a basket in the living room that says Dana for Genjo.
It's hanging next to the steps, correct?
Yes.
Little basket. Okay, great. That's a new thing here. Cool. Is there a special place you'd like to dedicate your dana?
I'll receive it. Thank you.
Today's speaker is Reverend Teijo, or Reverend Trey Genjo Williams, a student of Reverend Teijo Munnich in the Jikai, Dainin, Katagiri, Roshi lineage of Zen Buddhism. He recently practiced at Kotaiji, a training monastery in Nagasaki, Japan, and Toshoji, a training monastery in Yakage, Japan, where he spent 9 months. He currently lives in Asheville and continues his practice with the Zen Center of Asheville and Great Tree Zen Women's Temple. And the title of today's talk is Life in the Sacred Womb.
Good morning. The title of the talk is today is Life is the Sacred Womb. I gave a talk when I got back from Japan earlier this year. And I titled it Life in the Sacred Womb after a phrase in this text called the Kikyomon, which is translated as the standard of the tortoise shell mirror. And this text was given to me when I kind of first got to Japan. So I was there last March, and I started my monastic training at a monastery called Kotaiji. And there I met a teacher, a priest, an American-born priest named Teijo, and he's one of the guiding teachers at Kotaiji. He's been there for several years. And he's a student of the abbot there, Hojo-san. And Teijo had recently translated this text to Kikyomon. And I was there at Kotaiji just for about 3 weeks, and was welcomed into the monastery and into the practice. Got to practice with the sangha there for 3 weeks, and then I left to spend pretty much the remainder of the year at Toshoji, which is a different training monastery in Japan. And as kind of a parting gift, Teijo gave me a copy of this Kikyomon that he had just translated. And reading it, that phrase, life in the sacred womb, and in brackets there it says of the monastery, the sacred womb of the monastery, really stuck out to me. You know, it's kind of one of those wordings or words or phrases or things that just kind of jump out at you, you know, in this practice. Don't always know at first why, but just something about it kind of sticks with you. And that has stuck with me. And it's just kind of been sitting with me since then. And so I'd like to just kind of continue that kind of that thread and keep kind of sitting with it and trying to understand it and understand why it jumped out at me. And so I'd like to keep talking about it because it was kind of preparing for these talks and then talking about it and discussing it and hearing others' thoughts kind of helps me to understand it better, maybe understand its importance to me. So the Kikyomon, and you can find a copy online if you're interested. If you search up on Google Kikyomon Reiho, so and I can put that into the chat for spelling. You can find a PDF copy, and it's free to download. But this Kikyomon, it was written by a Japanese priest, or excuse me, a Chinese priest, and published as part of a collection of his 10-volume work. His name is in Chinese Zongzi, in Japanese Choro Sosaku. And this was published in 1103, so about 100 years before Dogen Zenji. And according to Reiho's introduction of the text, it had a very big influence on Dogen. And the whole volume did. And this text in particular, Kikyomon, Dogen referenced quite a bit. And Reiho says in the intro that there are at least 10 direct quotes from the Kikyomon that Dogen uses throughout his work. And so, of course, Dogen Zenji is very important to me and to us in this practice. And we've been here at Great Shri, we've been reading Okumura Roshi's commentary on Sansuikyo, the Mountains and Waters Sutra. And so, of course, I don't understand Dogen at all. And I'm trying to, but also trying not to, as Okumura Roshi recommends. He says at the beginning of his commentary on the Mountains and Waters Sutra, he says, do not understand it. And I think my understanding of that is that's not a negative. It's to do the practice of not understanding, to engage with the text or with Dogen, not with this mind that tries to understand or intellectualize, but just be with it. Just be with it. And so this Kikyomon is also kind of part of that, not understanding Dogen, kind of tracing Dogen's path, and since he seems to have been very influenced by this text, it's something that's kind of gripped me. We just have some notes here, just some kind of factoids about the text. Well, okay, so another priest, another teacher, a Zen teacher, the Japanese Zen teacher, Menzan Dohaku. He has some commentary on this Kikyomon as well, which I haven't been able to track down. And my guess is that it hasn't been translated into English. I'm not 100% on that, but that would be kind of my sense. But in talking about the standard of the tortoise shell mirror, the Kikyomon, he says, Menzan says, a tortoise is a venerable 1,000-year-old spirit whose wisdom is all-encompassing and who can respond to all questions. Similarly, a mirror, he says, can be used to verify the form of all things, as it reflects whatever is placed in front of it without discrimination. And so the tortoise shell, my understanding is it's kind of a standard. It's a mirror, almost like a role model. And according to Reiho Keizan Zenji, his Sangha read this text as part of their practice on the first of every month. And so it's got some, it's got some influence on our lives now as Soto Zen practitioners. And it was interesting too, because just before I left for Japan, we were reading a text by Keizan Zenji that had been translated recently. Last year was the 700th anniversary of his death, so there was a lot of energy in the Soto world around Keizan Zenji. And so we were having a mini practice period here at Great Tree, and this in the text, this came up, this phrase, this tortoise shell mirror. And I remember having a really animated discussion about what could that mean. And so then to go to Kotaiji a few weeks later and receive this standard of the tortoise shell mirror text kind of just caused me to pay attention. Oh, there's, it's kind of coming up again and again, as things do in this life and in this practice, And so I'll just read that short passage. It's a pretty short text, so here's the entire thing, complete with Reiho's introduction and a little bit about, translator's note and whatnot, and footnotes in the back. So it's pretty short, and the text is divided into just a few sections. Has an introduction from Choro Sosaku, and then he talks about the 24 at the time, and I guess in his monastery, and this was the practice he lived during Song Dynasty China. So just at the turn of the 12th century. There were 24 roles in the monastery. And so the first section, after the introduction, he goes through these 24 roles. And then the next section, he goes through each role and how they can be performed well, essentially. And then the next section, he talks about how the Sangha can support and appreciate the role. And then in the next section, he talks about how not to perform the role. And then in the final section before the conclusion, he talks about what the Sangha should avoid doing in order to respect and uplift whatever the role is. And it goes through, the Shutso, the head of practice, the abbess, which I think he calls the Choro, the Tenzo. Some I was familiar with, and I stood here regularly, and some I hadn't. Many of the roles, most of them I hadn't heard of, which is just my own ignorance. It's not to say that they're not still being used. And so this part here, life in the sacred womb. He says, these functions, and this is just after the section where he's discussing how the Sangha can appreciate and support the various roles. He says, these functions are how the activity of the way is renewed in the monastic road. Superior disciples will make use of it throughout their entire lives. Ordinary practitioners will find nourishment and grow while in the sacred womb of the monastery. So that piece, yeah, it jumps out at me, finding nourishment and growing in the sacred womb of the monastery. Which is why, after I got back from Japan and I was doing my best to kind of share about my experiences in the monastery, which was difficult for me to do. I talked about it as life in the sacred womb. And I've been sitting with that and resonating on that. And it's not, I don't think, confined to the monastery, right? I think all of life is the sacred womb. It's not just monastery, it's not just the temple, it's not just the church or these places we consider sacred, but all of life is the sacred womb. There's nourishment and potential for growth. And I looked up, I'm thinking about, okay, well, what does the sacred mean and what is a womb? And the simplest definition I found of the womb on Merriam-Webster is a place where something is generated. And I like that. I like the simplicity of it. And to me, trying to kind of jump out of my dualistic discriminating mind here, recognize that all life is the sacred womb, and it's not even that we're inside of sacred womb, but that we are a part of the sacred womb. We are the womb. There's a part in Okumura Roshi's commentary on the Sansui-kyo on Mountains and Water Sutra, where he's referencing the Genjo koan and Dogen Zenji's Zenki, another fascicle in the Showa Genjo. And Okumura Roshi says, he says something like, we create the world and the world creates us. It's interdependence, it's mutuality, it's this kind of cycle. It's the emptiness of the three wheels, giver, receiver, and gift. They're all depend on each other and are thus inseparable from each other and ultimately the same. It's like Dogen Zenji says, form is form and emptiness is emptiness, because within that it is everything. And as soon as we try to say form is emptiness and emptiness is form, or this is that and that is this, there's an inherent duality there. There's inherent separation. And of course, that's our reality too, discrimination. None of us would be here without discriminating mind. We have to make choices. And that to me bolsters the sacred womb. We make choices, we decide how we want to live our life, and that in turn creates our life. There's a priest who came over, a Japanese priest who came over to support Suzuki Roshi and Katagiri Roshi with the San Francisco Zen Center, Kobun Otogawa Roshi, and he was a Kyudo practitioner, a Japanese archery practitioner, and he says, when we sit zazen, it's like releasing the arrow. The arrow hasn't landed yet. We don't necessarily know when or where it's going, but everything we do and don't do has consequences, right? And so we can, through our practice, we can, I think, see more clearly the decisions we're making, how we're living our lives, and the results of it. And that's been really ripe for me too, because another thing we've been doing here at Great Tree this practice period is an exploration of mindful politics. There's just a lot there for me, the world of politics, the world of mindfulness. And it's a good practice for me to explore within myself the way I discriminate in terms of what is sacred and what realms are sacred and what are not. And how it's kind of an orientation. I try to come back to this orientation that every moment is sacred. Every moment is our life. Every moment we are life. And regardless of what we're doing, every thought, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, every feeling, every emotion, every action, whether we're sitting on the toilet or brushing our teeth or planting flowers. It's all sacred. And can I, my practice is try to bring that orientation to it and notice the things I tend to leave out of that. So, well, this isn't sacred. This isn't Buddha. Buddha's over there. But of course, it's right here. Our whole life is this. Our whole life is the womb. And I was kind of reflecting on it, and at Toshoji, we have in the toilets above the stalls and above the urinals a short gata, I suppose, kind of these short poems that are meant to kind of bring us back into that mindset, back into this moment too, is our life and is sacred. And so it's a chant that we would do while we were using the bathroom. Sayu Benri Kodan Shujo Genjo Munnich, to just kind of bring us back to that outlook. And we have those here at Great Tree too. We have some gatas in the bathroom and throughout the temple to just kind of help us bring us back to that orientation. And I don't know the English translation of that verse I just read, but when I think about it, I think about it, or what's a helpful outlook for me at least is recognizing, the functionality and the importance of everything, of all of life, and what a gift it is, and a miracle in a way that we are able to take in these things and our body can figure out what we need and don't need, and then let go of the rest. And that letting go just happens naturally, and even that is not waste. It can be used to generate more life. It's generative. Everything. And then just, we had a lot of intense thunderstorms here in Western North Carolina. We had a really epic one last night, and just huge thunderclaps, lightning strikes. Yeah, my dog is here, and she doesn't enjoy the thunder too much. She gets and we're in a temperate rainforest here, and how it's all necessary. It's all necessary, and everything is actually nourishing and being nourished all the time, and we're not separate from it as human beings, despite our tendency to think we are, or act like we are, try to dominate nature and the world and others, and even that separation. Life is out there versus life is here, and we're all part of it. And I was, I take Kiku, my dog, down, started taking her down to the creek every morning. There's a small creek, flat creek, that runs at the bottom of the temple. And just being there and noticing that relationship as well, how the creek feeds the land and the land feeds the creek. They're really inseparable. They're all part of this womb. They're all generating life. And I think that's one thing this practice helps us see, is how we are disrupting that flow, how we are getting in the way of the natural generativity of life, and when we sit, that's really becomes really clear, because we don't do anything when we sit. Nothing happens. We're staring at the wall, and it doesn't make any sense. And It's like, okay. And yet everything happens, you know, and because everything happens, I think that sitting helps us realize that, oh yeah, you know, we are already all a part of this. We don't have to do anything special. We just have to live our lives and breathe in, breathe out, you know, drink when we're thirsty, eat when we're hungry, uh, that sort of thing. And then we can see all the ways that we complicate life. We make it more than it needs to be, and that how that kind of gets into our relationships and then into our own minds. You know, I was reflecting on the monastery and temple and just this practice in general and sesshin with a friend, and how, you know, talking about living at a temple and doing this practice and doing retreats for folks who may not have had the opportunity to do that or taken the opportunity to do that. You know, can sometimes be this notion that, wow, you know, wow, you were on a Zen retreat, you're on a sesshin, you must have been like so peaceful, and I bet it was so chill, and was it hot tubs, you know, and like spa, you know, it's kind of a spa image they have. And the reality is, you know, on sesshin, I'm like in the war zone, you know, I'm like at war with myself. And I get to see that, and peace comes, you know, a lot of times after a few days, but there's oftentimes some inner turmoil to get through, because of the way I over complicate things, you know, and I create stories, and and it's a gift, you know, it's the miracle of being human. We have this great brain, you know, that can dream and envision and then bring these things to life. But it's, you know, there's kind of that shadow and light to everything. We have to work with both. There's a at the beginning of this text, Reiho talks about interdependence, in Japanese engi, and repaying gratitude, in Japanese hon. And I'll just read it, short couple paragraphs, and kind of sets the basis for the text. He says, fundamental to this approach, and he's talking about the approach to this text, the approach that Choro Sosaku took to writing this text. Fundamental to the approach are the notions of interdependence, engi, and repaying gratitude, hon, fundamental social concepts in East Asian Buddhist culture. Simply put, interdependence means that all phenomena only appear and continue to exist by virtue of the causes and conditions provided by other phenomena. By extension, in a human social system, an individual is the product of context, parents, community, the surrounding environment. In this way, all members of a community depend on all other members. Even the body-mind of an individual, and certainly all goods and services which a person receives, are likewise given by others. Such gifts are seen as a blessing, hon in Japanese, for which gratitude is felt and in some way must be repaid, ho, which becomes hon. And he continues, through such exchanges, connections are formed, acknowledged, and strengthened. This is what binds the individual to a group, as well as children to parents, disciples to masters, even descendants to their deceased ancestors, biological or spiritual. In this way, a community is seen as a network built upon gratitude and giving. It might be interesting to contrast this with philosophies that see society as being built upon an implicit social contract between independent individuals, and all primarily seeking personal benefit. And I really like that interplay of interdependence and gratitude. Um, and I was kind of thinking about it and think about gratitude or repaying. I don't love the word repaying because just my, I guess my Westist or maybe just my Western mind, but the idea of obligation or indebtedness. But I don't think it's really that. I really think that the way I feel is that this gratitude is the natural response to interdependence. It's kind of gratitude in action, showing and feeling and practicing gratitude is kind of the only logical response to interdependence, which of course is a reality of our life. It's recognizing that I on an ultimate level, right, there is no separation. We are really all one. We, it, us. But even on a more kind of relative level, I don't exist without the context of my life. And the context of my life is my life. Sitting on this cushion, reading these texts, being here on Zoom, being at Great Tree with the Sangha here, the Sangha online. It's all me, and I wouldn't exist in this way without it. And it's nourished and it's just there. You all are just here and the air is just here. But of course, it's not just here. You've all worked hard and lived lives and made choices to be here at this moment. The trees have worked hard and worked with the sky and the air and the water to be supporting our respiration. And people have worked hard to create the technology and create the cushion I'm sitting on, and Great Tree and the mugs and the water, tea. Tea was brought to me. There's constantly receiving, and it's back to that emptiness of the three wheels. I think giver, receiver, and give. It's kind of the natural response to give, and that giving becomes receiving. And it keeps the wheels spinning and it keeps our life in motion. And it's nothing extra too. It's just kind of, again, I think this kind of natural response before I can spin off into intellectualizing or second guessing or doubting, And so I hope to continue to get a chance to talk about this and look at it and sit with it. This idea of the sacred room, and I want to stop there because I would like to hear others' thoughts and questions regarding this or about anything, because it's all helpful. And so yeah, let's open it up.
Genjo, I have a question. So you're speaking about how different parts of life sort of act as nourishment in the sacred womb. And to me, it's very easy to imagine how like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha support that nourishment, right? But like an equal part of life is all of the negative stuff that we deal with in life. And, I'm thinking even about the mindful politics stuff. We've talked a lot about dealing with sort of like the people and ideologies that make life difficult. And I'm wondering how you see those parts as being part of the womb. Like, are they doing some kind of nourishment? Is there a different kind of mechanism that they're providing for this life in this womb? Or I don't know. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's yeah, right. That's tricky, especially in the realm of politics. And I think about it with karma, a lot of times there's this idea that And I think it's kind of an excuse to not get involved.
Mhm.
It's like, well, that's their karma, you know, they were born into that because of past deeds. And I don't know, that's what's coming up for me. But I think, you know, in my experience, the things that are really difficult, conflict, um, you know, I'm in the midst of some conflict with a really good friend of mine right now, and grief, you know, death, these things that are really difficult. You know, like you're saying, all the parts of life too that are unpleasant, right? That we want to avoid or ignore, pretend that they don't exist. I think when in my experience, sitting with them and turning towards them and embracing them, um, we can learn so much, you know, and they help us grow so much.
Mhm. Mhm.
And like what Dogen Zenji says in the Genjo Koan, you know, to study the Buddha way is to study the self.
Mhm.
And to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be realized by all things. And I think that's part of us too, the unpleasantness, you know, and the hard things, the things that we want to ignore and like, or um, yeah, the aspects of life um, that are difficult and ugly and painful and mean and vicious and oppressive um, are part of us too, you know. Um, it's kind of back to non-discriminating mind. Can I see those things outside that I'm really averse to? Can I see them in myself? And in that seeing them, there's transformation that happens, you know, so that we can continue to claim and create, right? Back to this idea of we create the world and the world creates us, create the peaceful and loving and compassionate world that we want to be in, you know. So they really help. I think those things, when we can embrace them, help us to wake up. Um, and they help us to connect with others, you know, that so I think there's that when we see suffering in other people, there's that response to want to help, you know. So there's connection there. There's the story that goes back to the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. I believe it's a mother who's lost her child and she's grieving, and she goes to the Buddha and she wants she asks, you know, how can this pain be taken away? And he says to her, go and collect a mustard seed from every house that that doesn't know this grief you're experiencing, that hasn't been touched by this death and this loss. And so she goes around the whole village. And of course she goes to every house and she comes back to the Buddha empty-handed, because of course nobody hasn't been touched by grief and death and loss and pain and suffering. And so she is not able to collect any mustard seeds, but her suffering is transformed. And I think it's, when I think about it, is transformed through connection, to recognizing that we're all in this together, you know. And I think too, you know, just thinking about our particular karma in the West and thinking about Dr. Larry Ward's book, America's Racial Karma, I think so much of where we are now is based on ignorance, and based on that ignoring where we've been and seeing that the ugly parts of life and our ugly past, painful past that we don't want to acknowledge, and ignoring it rather than embracing it and recognizing that, no, this can be nourishing. This can be compost for our lives, you know.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, thank you for your question. That's a good question. I think an important question.
I think it's also helpful to recognize that, considering these different realms of existence, like the hell realm and the heaven realm, that the heaven realm can lead to kind of complacency
Right. Like another thing that something that Genjo said brought up in me was like, the idea that like kind of like suffering is the teacher. And like to have compassion for people that you love and that are nice to you is not very spiritually deep. Like it's very easy to love people who love you back, but it's sort of like the real kind of spiritual development in oneself, I feel like happens when you have to practice compassion for people who are challenging your beliefs about who deserves compassion and stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. There's a quote here that I wrote down. I wasn't sure if it was going to be relevant, but I'm going to make it relevant. I really like it. It's from James Baldwin in his collection of essays, The Fire Next Time. And he says, "It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide, indeed, to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. One is responsible to life. It is the small beacon in that terrifying darkness from which we come and to which we shall return. One must negotiate this passage as nobly as possible, for the sake of those who are coming after us." I love that, negotiating the passage. To me, it kind of reminds me of the womb. We're in this impermanent realm. We're not gonna stay here. Nothing does. Everything changes, and yet we're here now. And I think that's implied in the womb too. The womb is a sort of passage. You don't and can't stay in the womb forever. You have to be birthed into life. You have to go somewhere. And I like this quote too, because the agency too. He says, one must negotiate this passage as nobly as possible for the sake of those who are coming after us. We create the world and the world creates us. And, what kind of world do we want to create and how do we get there? That's kind of been at the root of the mindful politics. We've got to read different thinkers, different Buddhist thinkers about that, their ideas of how we get to where we want to be. I think so much of it is recognizing where we are now. And the Dalai Lama says in one of the essays, he really emphasizes two things: self-examination and self-correction. I think that's what our practice helps us with, our Zazen practice. Every time we sit, we can see ourselves and see kind of the life we're creating. And I think it's in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I could be wrong, but Suzuki Roshi says something like every time we get off the cushion, the world is created anew. And I think we can reclaim more and more agency through our practice, more and more responsiveness. So we're not reacting habitually, but we're kind of really choosing. We're noticing, how our actions, how our thinking is creating the conditions of our life and our life. Everyone's in it together, which means, interdependence. We affect each other, even when we don't do anything. And so we can choose, we can make choices that support the life we want to live and create with others, alongside others.
And I was wondering if you might go back to, you were talking about embracing the ugly parts of your life. Another teacher refers that to karmic arrows. And how do you see, rather than ignore it, how do you see incorporating it into your life? I think you use the word as compost. Would you kind of go into that a little more, please? Because this is very interesting to me.
Karmic errors, like kind of noticing. Can you say more?
Arrows.
Oh, a karmic arrow.
Pierced by a cosmic arrow, yeah. That you still have embedded in you and you carry it with you, yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because I prefer to ignore it, those arrows, and you're saying no, we need to embrace them and incorporate them and make them. I think that's what you were trying to say, or that's what I heard you saying. So if you could maybe go into that a little more, please.
Yeah. Well, it's painful, right? Thinking about getting shot by an arrow. I've never been shot by an arrow, but I've been pierced by things. I've been stabbed myself, cutting things. And it's painful. And I think it's easy too. I have that tendency. I can just kind of push through pain, push through suffering. But that doesn't help it go away, and it's having an influence too. I think whether we're conscious of it or not. I'm just thinking about, because it's happened somewhat frequently. If I cut myself in the kitchen, if I don't take the time to tend to that wound, I'm bleeding everywhere. Now the kitchen is a mess. There's blood in the food, and that's contaminating, the food. So I think we have to take the time to pause and tend to our hurt, tend to the wound, which is hard. It's sometimes easier to pretend it's not there, because it takes time. It takes slowing down. It takes acknowledging that we've been hurt and that we have hurt, and can take apologizing, or ask, can take confrontation even, recognizing that where is this arrow coming from? What's the source of it? What do I need to do to attend to the hurt, and then also try to avoid the situation where I'm getting pierced by arrows again, and that's what I'm learning a lot. Like I said, I'm in the midst of conflict with a really good friend of mine, and I was hurt by him, and rather than slowing down and tending to the hurt, that hurt took control of me, and then I hurt him, and it's great too. It's really good because I'm learning so much from this experience, and I'm really grateful for him to be in it with me. I'm really grateful too for this practice that allows us to sit in the midst of the hurt and the conflict or the discomfort when really we want to run away, or cancel. We're in the midst of like this cancel culture, right? Where somebody hurts us or somebody says something we don't agree with, or something that's toxic or not in alignment, and rather than include them in our lives, in our sangha, and sit down and say, hey, like, can we look at this? Can we address this and figure out what's going on? We exile them, or we exile ourselves. We can do it to ourselves. We can feel so much shame around what we've done that we can't confront. We're afraid and unable to confront whomever or confront ourselves. But then the ability to transform that isn't there, and then it gets repeated. Because ignoring something doesn't make it go away, it just gets buried, right? and so it's going to show up somewhere else. So I don't know if that quite is kind of where you were, but those are my thoughts.
Thich Nhat Hanh does a beautiful, over and over again, kind of set of teachings about that, talking about when you have anger or a hurt heart or whatever your experience is. He always says, be peace. You first have to address yourself, and so he has these words, like he says, oh, my hurt heart, I'm here for you. I'm here for you, and embrace, very, as much as you can, actually look and embrace that experience that is unsettling your you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. In one of the mindful, I hope this is okay to share, Quinn, in one of the mindful politics groups, Quinn, you mentioned a similar thing of like when we feel anger, we can tend to it. We can slow down and tend to it like a baby, and in that regard, we really become the womb, right? And I think that allows it to transform. Otherwise, we're going to give birth to like this demon baby. That's how angry, wreaking havoc, which is okay. There's always the possibility for transformation.
And I think that mindset, like Anne, what you were kind of saying of just like embracing that suffering and pain, like not only in yourself, but also in other people. Like when someone hurts you or when there's like some politics that makes you upset, I like to think about the fact that that person is acting that way because they're acting out of fear or pain or some kind of suffering. And instead of responding like, I hate you, screw you for saying that mean thing. Instead, it should be like, like a mother embracing a child, like, oh, you poor thing, like what's wrong? Why do you feel so much pain? And like, what can we do to alleviate your suffering? Um, yeah.
We have a few more minutes if there's anything else anyone would like to say before we go into announcements. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Great practice. All right. Announcements. Tomorrow we have a family meditation. And so we're on Zoom and in person. So all are welcome. That starts at 10:30. We're going to continue. We have 2 more weeks in this practice period. So 2 more weeks of our mindful politics study group. So we meet Wednesday evenings at 6:30. And there is an essay that we read, but you don't have to have read it to come to the group and participate. And this week we're reading, if you do have the book, we're reading The Buddha's Politics by Reginald Ray. We're going to start in July, Sunday service, work days. And so we'll do some sitting, we'll do some work together, we'll do some lunch, we'll do some work together, we'll have some tea. You don't have to come for all of that, but if you are interested, this is just continuing to prepare for the mountain seat ceremonies that are happening early September. And so there's some grounds cleaning and things around the temple to get done. So please, is the best thing to email info at, if you're in, so email info@greattruetemple.org if you'd like to come. So we it's helpful to RSVP so we have a sense of how much food we'll need. Am I missing anything?
Oh, also, like if people want to get this information automatically, you should join the mailing list, which you can also do by emailing me and I'll put you on it. So you'll get volunteer opportunities and newsletters and things like that.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. We'll give back the merit and then close out and do 3 prostrations. May the merit of this practice,
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings,
benefit all beings,
and bring peace,
and bring peace.
Thank you.
I'm gonna do the regular job.